Sex and porn addiction is prevalent in our communities, and most of us don't even know it. All this to say, though, that not all sex and porn is bad. In this episode, I talk to the Executive Director of Saskatoon Sexual Health and Sex Addiction Survivor, Cottrell, and sex addictions professional Patrick Eilers about the complexities of these addictions and how anyone out there struggling may find a better way. But before we get into that, what's up? My name's Dan, podcaster, keynote speaker, and advocate, and this is Hard Knocks Talks, your addictions podcast. If you're interested in fostering productive conversations about substance use in your community, organization, or event, shoot us an email at daniel@hardknockstalks.com. Now with that out of the way, let's get into my talk with Caitlin and Patrick.
This is Hard Knocks Talks.
So I am really excited about this today because I have had my own revelations in this realm. Even as soon as recent as like 6 or 7 months ago, I changed some behaviors and quite literally the relations in my life changed. So I'm interested to talk about this. Caitlin, I brought you here this morning because you are very knowledgeable in this realm, being the director of Saskatoon Sexual Health. Surely that comes with a strong desire to help people, and you have your own lived experiences. So why don't we start there? Why don't we take 5 minutes, and why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey that got you here?
Thank you. That sounds good. One of the things for me, so I used to weigh almost 500 pounds. And so what you see in these addictive cycles, and especially with like consumption addictions around food, sex, shopping, gambling, these sort of like non-substance related addictions, is that you kind of jump. And not that that's not common in substance use as well. Mm-hmm. So in 2012, 2012, I flew to Mexico. I flew to Tijuana, and I had a vertical sleeve gastrectomy. So I had about 75% of my stomach removed. Mm-hmm. And I very, very quickly lost about 200 pounds within 18 months. And that really changed everything.
I was going to say, for the good or for worse?
Both. Very much
like,
so.
I can imagine, like, if you come across, I mean, when you weigh that, or when you have a body that you're really unhappy with, or that society might see as undesirable, can I say that?
Yeah, 100%.
So, and then now you lose 200 pounds and you're like, oh, what am I going to do with this Lamborghini now? Right? Like,
you know what? 100%. That is exactly what happened.
Yeah.
And I was in the north. I was working in the Yukon in a fly-in community called Old Crow. Mm-hmm. Right after I'd had this surgery. So I'd lost maybe 150 pounds before my ex-husband and I went up north. And it was bizarre, guys. Like, I was in a whole new body. I was in a place where no one knew me, didn't know my history, didn't know that I used to weigh 500 pounds. And I shared this fairly openly with people. Mm-hmm. And it was fantastic in so many ways.
I'm going to say, like, it probably was a lot of fun at the time.
It was wonderful. I was 29 when we moved up there. I was working as the director of health for the Vuntut Gwich'in. It was one of the most beautiful places I'd ever been in my life. Mm-hmm. And I was making a shit ton of money. My ex-husband and I were like, it was amazing, and we had no kids. We were living in like an extreme northern zone, so our tax benefits were like indescribable. Mm-hmm. And so I switched from food to shopping because I had the means. Mm-hmm. I had just finished grad school, and now was making, I remember the first time I paid for an app when I'd been like downloading the free ones as a poor student forever. And I'm like, fuck, I made it. I can pay for technology now. This
premium Tinder.
100%.
So anyways, before we get Patrick in here to talk about this, what led you into, like, would you say that you're in recovery from sex addiction?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I would.
So what was it a pinnacle event that happened that woke you up, or was it you woke up one day and just said, I don't want to live like this anymore?
I was destroying a lot of the relationships in my life.
Yeah. And I want to talk to Patrick about that for sure. Yeah.
It's a lot of secrecy, just like with any addiction.
Yeah.
and it's a lot of stigma
Mm-hmm.
that you're dealing with, and a lot of shame that especially like your family
Mm-hmm.
can often experience.
So did the cat get let out of the bag somehow, or like what happened?
Yes. So at the end of our marriage, my ex-husband and I decided to explore polyamory, which I am still in an active polyamorous relationship, obviously not with my ex-husband. Um, and one of my brother's friends saw me on Tinder and told my brother, and then my brother told my parents. And so that was sort of the preliminary, and then my marriage ended.
Yeah.
And then I was living with my brother for a little while after that, and so there was a lot of they were very aware, sort of what
and
was
unhappy
going.
and judging, or
I think worried,
worried,
and I wouldn't necessarily say judgment, at least not at the beginning, but
Yeah.
definitely concerned that they had seen the cycle before a couple of times, and like I'd always been a bit of a consumer, not just food, but like I definitely have some hoarding tendencies that I'm still working on.
I hoard studio equipment.
I can see that. Yeah, I can see that.
But it's productive, so it's okay.
Yeah. No, a lot of it was just I was causing a lot of harm, and I was creating a lot of concern.
Yeah.
And I was not able to really communicate what my needs were because the physical need kind of overwhelmed that dopamine cycle.
Yeah.
Kind of overwhelmed my
the line between needs and wants gets very blurred.
Very much
in any of this.
Yeah.
Okay, let's bring in Patrick and start grilling him. Patrick, hello.
Hi, Daniel. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you for joining us. You have been listening along here. Yeah, of course. So tell us something that stuck out to me was the importance and the influence of relationships around Caitlin's experiences here. Is that a common thread when people find themselves falling into sex addiction?
Yeah, Caitlin talked about a lot of stuff that I would say was spot on as far as what things we would maybe look for, especially the fact that you said the relationships that get affected. Usually it's the partnership relationship. So one of the things that we often see, and I always say this when people come in and say what's going on, how do I look at my symptomology and those kind of things, is that typically the partners are affected by that, most impactfully, obviously, because they're the closest person. So typically they start to experience what they call partner betrayal trauma. And so they start to experience like PTSD symptomology. So that's a very common piece of that. I'm not a partner betrayal specialist, so I can't really give too much to that, but I just know from my experience working with people who struggle with sex addiction, there's a piece of that. Usually the secrecy.
Now, Caitlin mentioned family here. Now, is there some of that trauma that can be experienced by family members?
I don't see it as often, but I'd imagine if you're close enough to a family, they probably start to see some of that. From Caitlin mentioned the worriedness, kind of the what's really going on, those kind of things. So I think there's probably a little bit of that, but not probably to the same degree that a person who's in a partnership with somebody would. And so when I say partnership, I mean like intimate relationship, committed relationship in that sense.
And I hear that from other behavioral challenges as well, like substance use, like gambling, like shopping. The focus of the person who is struggling with the behavior becomes so focused on the behavior that the partner feels betrayed.
Yeah, and I think Caitlin mentioned that all of those the cycling through other addictions, the cycling through the other type of compulsive behaviors. That's very common. Sex addiction tends to be one of these ones they call it a process addiction. So it's similarly aligned with food. A lot of things that describe food describe sex, and so there's a very similar correlation there. The other thing, you mentioned gambling would be one of those. Kind of the shopping. I think all those kind of would fit in that category, but I think substances can also be there too. Sometimes people will mix the substance with the sexual addiction, so you kind of see that kind of play off each other.
I'm completely guilty of that back in the day. Meth is a hell of a drug. Caitlin's like, yep.
Never having experienced it personally, but having observed the effects in hundreds of people, I can't. That's not a one I would want to try.
I
And in
guess,
some cases, sex will actually numb. So people actually use it as a numbing, or again, usually the fantasy. Those are two of the big ones.
yeah.
So those are kind of they'll play off in that way, right? The highs and the lows.
Yeah. For me, like with my experiences now, I don't know if I would call this like a problematic addiction that I was experiencing. Now, I had these behaviors that I would watch certain content for 5 minutes in the morning, and then I would get on with my day, and I did that every day for a very, 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 very long time. That had become just something that was normal to me. And then I went to go onto this ceremony. I did some work with psychedelics with a shaman, and there's a dieta that you do before you go into these ceremonies. And one of those things was disengaging with that behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got about 3 days into that disengagement,
You get itchy.
well, yes, but it changed. Because like I am in a relationship, and I do have a loving partner, and we do communicate, and our communication deepened with that. Now I'm actually like, I want to help with the housework. I want to be more engaged with her. I want to have conversations with her. I want to, and it's just like that life force energy. Like if you want to talk about tantra, and we can talk about that a little bit, I guess, but like it's that energy that is just being wasted. When you can read and channel that energy. And but the reason I'm saying all of this is because it's like not like a heroin addiction. Right? Like with heroin addiction, if you want to break free from your heroin addiction, you probably stop completely and never go back. Right? But with food addiction or with sex addiction, it's not unhealthy with food you can't, you have to eat. Right? But with sex, it's like that's a part of the human experience,
Well, and that's one of the hardest things with consumption addictions is, I mean, like you don't necessarily need to shop, although you have to buy food and clothing and stuff like that, but you have to eat. You have to. Physiologically, you have to consume calories. No, you know what? I'm not going to say most, but at least a large portion of adults want to engage in some kind of sexual activity. And if you're in a relationship, that's usually one of the expectations.
And so I think it should be. And now I can only speak from my own, experience. But the thought of never having sex again is frankly terrifying. Patrick, what do you tell people who are in relationships still, who are trying to break free from this behavior, but also still want to have a healthy relationship with their partner?
Yeah, and it's how we define healthy, I think. But I really like that Caitlin. I want to make a point. I really like that Caitlin calls it a consumption addiction, because I think that's a better word than process addiction. Just as we're talking, but the part of it is that this goes back to the healthy piece. Is I think that's one thing that we don't, as a society, know very well. Right? We don't really know what is healthy, what's unhealthy. There's an example. Then one of the material that we use is that there's a guy who wants to have sex with his wife like 8 times a day. Just as a number. Now, is that healthy for that relationship? Maybe, but most likely probably not. So that's a very traditional type of, what would be the expectation, maybe, so to speak. We were kind of speaking to that. But then on the other side of it, what unhealthy behaviors could be, like exhibitionism, going in public and demonstrating yourself somewhere to someone who's, just at random. That's an unhealthy behavior, So it's kind of those things where the way I kind of break it down, the way I've looked at it is, there's relationally building type behavior, and there's self-serving behavior, and almost always unhealthy sexual behavior usually lands in the realm of, what is it? Is it about me, or is it about my relationship? Now, again, in the case I just gave you as the example, that would be unhealthy for that particular relationship, because let's in this case say the wife did not want to have sex that much, then is it about self-serving then for the husband in this case? So that's where I think you have to look at. I kind of draw the line between what's unhealthy and healthy is really about what's self and what's relationally building. And then from that point, when you're working on healing, are you getting away from those unhealthy behaviors to connect with your partner, rather than making it about kind of like what your stress, your relaxing, your fantasy, whatever it is that's going on for you. And to speak to what you said, Daniel, even that 5 minutes, I mean, is that, was that for Daniel, or was that for, Daniel's partner in that sense?
Oh,
so
that was,
that kind of example.
That was 100%
so
for
that's,
me. 100%.
So that's kind of where I would say, I think it's a big differentiation. And we don't talk about that in the society from that perspective, but that's exactly, pornography is like 100, pretty much all 100% of the time, self-serving. So just as an example, that's one that I would say for sure. There's not really any healthy pornography, because there's no relationally connecting pornography.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no. I heard someone say it once. There's no work associated with it. There's no relationship building exercise with it. You don't grow as a human. Typically, porn is related to let's get the job done as quick as we can and get on with our day, and that damages your whole thing, right? Because I mean, and especially if you're talking about men, if you're grooming yourself to just get it done as quick as you can, I mean, you're not going to really, and being stressed out is a terrible reason to have sex. Am I right?
Yeah, and a lot of times you see that, right? So men typically, when they're stressed, they want to have sex. When women are typically less stressed, then they want to have sex. So it's opposite in that sense.
I know.
So you have to have some self-serving in that.
That's what I've learned too. It's like if you want to improve your relationship, you got to reduce the stress. And sometimes foreplay looks like unloading the dishwasher.
100%.
So, Caitlin, you looked like you had something to say.
Yeah, sorry, and I have such a glass face. I'm watching myself, just being like, "Ugh."
Here, let's
put
you bigger so you can see yourself.
Be less reactive.
No, it's fine.
So, and I think for me, and I don't disagree on many of the things that you've said, but I think for me, there's like a spectrum, and you're looking at maladaptive coping mechanisms, and coping mechanisms can be completely healthy. It's how you approach them, what the effect is on you and others. And if you're pursuing maladaptive coping mechanisms, then they're causing harm to you and they're causing harm to the people around you. So for me, and one of the questions that my therapist asked me very early on in our sessions was, how often do you masturbate? And why? And it's the why piece that was the big deal, and not necessarily the how much, but why. Are you using it as an escape mechanism? Are you using it because you need dopamine? Are you using it because you need to avoid something? And in those circumstances, then likely that's not a maladaptive coping, or that is a maladaptive coping mechanism. I think that sex can be completely healthy and can in fact be a hobby and can in fact be recreational. But in those situations, you need both yourself and your partner to be on the same page. And one of the things that has, and I will admit, because I know my partner will watch and listen to this at some point, I'm still not amazing at communication. It's something that I am consistently working on and often fail. I definitely experience with the ADHD and the BPD some rejection sensitive dysphoria, and so having those like really big reactions to any perceived rejection. But I think it's about impact on you and on the people around you, on your environment, on your situation. And that was certainly something in my marriage, was there was an incredible sexual incompatibility. And
that can ruin it.
It really can.
Like,
it really can.
Let me just interrupt here for a minute. It seems like and perhaps because of porn, and because of how our society has been so sexualized, and if you want to sell, you throw a nice rack on your on your ad or whatever, but it just seems to be almost like as though it's been completely turned into a hobby. And sometimes it can be a hobby, like you mentioned, but when we're talking about being in a relationship, there is a lot of spirituality and a lot of sacred practices and things around that. Like I mentioned earlier, Tantra, that blew my mind. God, it blew my mind. Because I had my own stigma in my head, right? Like, oh, that's all whips and chains and kink and gross and only bad people do that. But when I started learning about it, holy cow, there is spirituality around it. I was listening to a podcast with a dominatrix the other day, and she was talking about the internal family system, and I was like, 100%. Whoa,
absolutely. Well, and so. And I think this is one of the things that is really dangerous, or can be really dangerous for people who are experiencing sex addiction. Just like any addictive behavior, you're very likely putting yourself in high risk situations. And so with sex addiction, that looks like having sex with complete strangers. It is having unprotected sex. It's having, just like going past the boundaries that you would in sort of I don't want to say sober because it's not the right word, but in a healthy frame of mind. Yeah. In an adapted frame of mind.
Yeah. And then you may bring those harms home.
100%.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I saw the greatest video yesterday. And so
Is that the survivor's laugh right there?
No, this is more like haha monogamous people laugh. So people often come to us at Saskatoon Sexual Health and ask, like, when should I get tested? Why should I get tested? And we recommend, like, everyone should get tested at least once a year, just as part of your general physical health. But there was a video yesterday that I think we maybe even posted it on our social media, and it was a nurse, a very sassy nurse, going to tell this monogamous couple that one of them has chlamydia. And this is the assumption, is like, you know what you're doing, no matter what. You know what your behavior is.
Yeah.
You cannot know, without a doubt, what your partner is doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that is one of the things that we definitely see, and I'm sure you see it as well, is often that is the event that brings sex addiction or maladaptive behavior around sex to the forefront, is someone's bringing home an STI.
Mm-hmm. Patrick, do you see that a lot?
In some cases, yeah. Usually it's some type of discovery, right? Whether it be they get caught finding porn, they get caught with a affair on some type of device or whatever the case. Yeah, dating apps. It's a pretty big one. Yeah, it depends on how they've been caught. That's usually what it is. Most people aren't coming in on their own will. Although I've had some people come because they realized how much it has actually affected their life, and from the perspective of whether it be at work, they're watching it porn at work, or they're engaging in unhealthy behavior somewhere else to get caught in some way. So I've had kind of a mix of different things, but I did want to go back to a little bit of just what Caitlin said. Is that I think that for me, I try to make it as simple in my own mind to try to explain it. So yes, is there absolutely a black and white of this is what's unhealthy, this is what's healthy, this is what's unhealthy? No, I would agree with you in the sense that it's a continuum, and there's a lot of personal reflection that the individual has to do, and kind of knowing what's healthy for them. As long as it's for number one, is it harming somebody else? Is it is it harming them? Those are probably the two big. Obviously you want to keep them safe. So those are probably your two big places you're kind of working from. But did just want to follow up on that, because I do think it is a continuum. It's not something that's necessarily just hard and fast type rules. But and any of these behaviors, there's not really anything. It's like hey, this is 100% healthy, 100% unhealthy. It's kind of a depends on personal conviction.
Got a question coming in. Barb, thanks for your question. Thanks for being here today. Barb says, do you think if our society had a better relationship with sex, less stigma, more open dialogue, that we would see less sex addiction or less difficulty addressing it?
100,000 million %.
I mean,
I can echo that.
And even in my own, and I can only come at this through a lens of personal experience. And I know, like, after the research that I've done, again, just like Googling Tantra and just reading a little bit of that and watching some videos about like transmutation, like, sexual transmutation, and talking about retention and all of the different things. It is a very beautiful and important part of humanity, of the human condition, right? And if we all understood that the way that I think that how it was meant to be, I think absolutely we would have less problems with it, and there would be less secrecy and less toxic stigma around it.
Absolutely. Despite the fact that we all experience sexuality in one way or another, and we all came out of a vagina. So we've all experienced sexuality in one way or another. Someone had to have sex for us to be born.
It's true.
But for many reasons, it is still a very private and very taboo and very stigmatized subject to talk about. And I think especially for women and for queer folks, this is not a space where we have had room. We have not been able, as women and queer people, to talk about our sexuality, to have any sort of like open space to express ourselves. And I think one of the biggest things that I see around sort of sex addiction and maladaptive sexuality is, and I have absolutely no issue with pornography. I think that it can be a healthy way to explore your desires, and especially if you're questioning maybe what turns you on. But highly edited, highly, I don't know what the right word is,
Well, it
but like
detaches you from how it typically really
it
is.
really does. And
Yeah, yeah, creates
a
a
lot of
fantasy.
the things that we see, like I'll have young people, 16, 17, 18, that we have conversations with, and it'll be like, the first time I had sex with my partner, he wanted to change positions every 20 seconds. He was,
Wanted to do this, wanted to do that.
and just the expectations that are built
Yeah.
from that like highly edited pornography,
Yeah.
like
Mhm.
without the recognition that there are huge breaks in between these scenes and takes, and like what you're seeing in 20 minutes probably took 2 or 3 or 4 days to create.
Mm.
And so it sets up these like massively unrealistic expectations for young people. And um like my generation and above didn't have as much access to pornography, and especially like video pornography.
That's a great segue into one of the things I wanted to address, and one of the reasons why I brought us together today. I had several emails a little while ago from a man who was very, very concerned about pornography in our society and how accessible it is, and what impacts that's having on our generations that are coming up into it right now, like our young, like 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, like, and what you were mentioning there. It's so readily available, and it's having a very bad impact.
Yes, absolutely, 100%. And I mean, it's certainly about the early age that people are being exposed. Like an 8-year-old doesn't need to see hardcore porn, just don't. Like you don't have the context. You don't have the
Yep.
social knowledge. You don't have, you don't have that awareness around intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
You're still building your own concepts of what love and connection are. And so to have that thrust into that development, I think, is not always positive.
I think it also keeps the stigma going, right? That's the
100%.
yeah, because you feel because you're like they don't understand, doesn't make sense of what's going on.
And
So
now
those
it's
early
porn's fault.
exposures, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, it's certainly yeah. The early exposures. I mean, that's a very common thing people report. 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, have an exposure to it. I think something you said, Daniel, and not to redirect us, but back to what you said about just how society looks at it, and I think part of it is the social media aspect of how everything has become sexualized. It's not
God, I'm
just
so glad
hey,
I
it's not
wasn't a
just like
teenager then.
yeah, exactly. It's not just like one thing. I mean, if you go on Instagram, it's everything, right? There's all these things about, and it's not even stuff that's necessarily meant to be sexual. It's just stuff that it's the way clothing is, it's the way positions are, it's the way photographs are. I mean, there's all these things like I do photography for fun, and just think about like the aspect of the difference between showing something that's of nature versus you see these hiking pages where there's a really awesome mountain in the background, but then there's a girl here in workout outfit, and it's like that kind of stuff becomes that's the underlying part of it, where I think people don't really understand how much that is influenced by what pornography has done, as far as like if you think about dripping through all of the cracks, it just seems like it's affecting so many things. And so I think that's a part of it where people are so overstimulated by it that it's hard for them to get it out of their own mind. And so that's one of the first things I always ask people when they come in is, what's your thought life like? Is what you're going to think about what you're going to do. And so it's part of it is, what's your awareness of what your own thinking is? If you spend 99% of your life thinking about sex in an unhealthy, healthy or otherwise way, you're going to probably be doing behaviors that aren't going to be healthy for you and for the people around you, kind of like Caitlin said. So, really what's in your thought life, because that's and social media and a lot of the ways that we communicate in the world and just the things that we show at every level of media really play a role in that.
Thought life. That's Caitlin. I'm going to turn that one over to you as the person here with the lived experience. Tell us a little bit about what your experience is in that and how it's changed as you've come to realize where your challenges lay.
So I've worked in healthcare for my whole professional career. I have a master's in public health, and so when I started my first job, At first, there was no room in my brain for anything but that. And I was working in a flying community. And so the logistics of running a health and social department were even more complex than they usually are. And so I didn't have a ton of room in my brain for much else.
So it was just sex, sex, sex.
Well, not then, but after.
Mhm.
After I took some time off work after my marriage ended.
Mm-hmm.
And it was at that point, and it was pretty consistent. It was pretty pervasive.
And it was
that,
fun for a minute, I'm sure.
yeah, and it was, but then that feedback loop starts. And um with sex addiction or with like compulsive sexual behavior, there's another layer of it, which is validation. You're seeking validation, and I think that does happen in substance use as well. But when you're interacting with another person, you're looking for that validation, that dopamine hit, and certainly you're going to get that like physiologically from having an orgasm.
Yeah.
But that social connection, that social interaction is also a big part of it.
Yeah, yeah. And not being able to find that social connection or that sexual connection. There's a big thing. What is it called? Incel, involuntarily
Voluntarily
celibate.
celibate.
Yeah, that's a thing.
Mhm.
Yeah, it is. It is for sure.
Yeah.
One of the things that I discovered through this, and certainly I knew it esoterically or like as a concept before this or before my experiences, but your sexuality is your responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
It is absolutely fucking no one else's responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Your desires, your fantasies, your kinks, your fetishes, those are on you, not on anybody else. And even if those fantasies, desires, kinks, even if they stem from trauma, you're not responsible for who hurt you or what hurt you. You are responsible for dealing with that. You are 100% responsible for being in charge of your own recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly you can ask for help and you can ask for support and you can have people in your life that are that help you with that. But just like with recovery from substance use,
Mm-hmm.
no one else can do it but you.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be the one driving the bus.
Yeah.
And I think just to go back to that pornography piece just really quickly,
Mm-hmm.
I find that it's not, again, it's not an unhealthy medium necessarily. It's not an unhealthy practice. It's how you do it and how you consume it and why you're consuming it.
Mm-hmm.
I do find like this would not be something that I would ever recommend for young people. This should not be your introduction to sexuality and sex, especially not like the super hardcore porn that is so easily accessible. These are going to create really unrealistic expectations for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is and can be very, very, very harmful.
Mm-hmm.
And not just for, like I think that there's this assumption that it's men watching pornography and like, or penis havers that are watching pornography and sort of then
Penis havers.
yeah.
I'm a penis haver. I've never been.
I try to be as gender affirming as I can be.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just not the case. And I think this is one of the other things is like women or vagina havers um are just as curious,
Mm-hmm.
but the pathways for access are different. And if women are expressive of their sexuality and their sexual desire, they're often placed into a very specific category.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to then be seen as anything other than promiscuous,
Mm-hmm.
which is really, really unfortunate. And I think that there are many ways that you can engage in healthy sexuality with multiple partners,
Mm-hmm.
but without, and it shouldn't affect your worth. and that, you know, there does become that inherent stigma and that internalized judgment of, well, society says that this is really bad.
Yeah. So now let's move into how Caitlin got control, how you
Yes.
took your power back. So it got away. You went astray. Would you agree? Is that a good term?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's like any, it's a compulsive behavior.
Yeah.
And you know, there's a difference between compulsive and impulsive.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, when you, especially into those like really really strong compulsive behavior patterns, there's a sense of having no power, of having no control
Over your own actions.
over your own actions.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And for me, that was also coupled with some pretty extreme mania from being, before I had the borderline personality diagnosis, I wasn't medicated for that. And so
Mhm.
definitely some, I would say, moderate psychosis in certain areas. Um I started going to Smart Recovery. So, Smart Recovery is a harm reduction based recovery program that is for any addiction. So, whereas the anonymous programs are broken down like GA, Gamblers Anonymous, NA, Narcotics Anonymous,
SA?
AA, yeah, Sex Anonymous, or Sex Addiction Anonymous.
I don't know.
There's a couple different ones.
Yeah, so Smart Recovery
Mm.
just looks at all of these things as addictive behaviors that need to be that need to be corrected and supported, basically.
Mhm.
um the thing that made the biggest difference for me was one of the sessions, and the leader, or the person that was running the session, talked about, don't feed the pig, don't give in to personal instant gratification.
Knowing what you know now about language, would you have preferred that they didn't use that word?
Not at all.
So you're down with it?
I'm down with it.
So there's a
Yeah.
pig in there.
Yeah, because like, think about it. Think
Yeah.
about like when you know, eating like a pig.
I get it.
Yeah.
100%.
And in reading some of how Smart was developed, there are some things in there that are a little bit more shocking, or a little bit more like pointed.
Mhm.
And I think as long as it's sandwiched with other things that are more positively directed, that those little hard
Those little digs.
nuggets can be incredibly useful.
Mhm.
They also talked about something called the hierarchy of values, and how do your own personal values reflect your behavior, and how does your behavior affect the people in your life. I had a really morbid thought when, about maybe 4 years after I had the weight loss surgery. And when you weigh 500 pounds, you do think about your own mortality fairly regularly, whether or not you admit it to yourself. And I had a thought about what would happen if I died, and what would my funeral be like. Super weird, probably very morbid thought, but I thought about what it would be like if I had died due to weight related issues. So if I'd had a heart attack, and how sad people would have been because it was a completely preventable death, right? This is a lifestyle or an addiction related death. I thought about what people would say about me when I was sort of at that peak, when I was 30 and making a lot of money, and, you know, in the top of my profession, and what people would have said about me then. And then I thought about, you know, 3 or 4 years later, well, maybe not quite that much, 2 or 3 years later, and what would people say, you know, if I died at that moment. And it you do recognize that, as much as maybe you don't want to care what people think about you, you do.
I was just going to call you out on that. You know, we tell our
Yeah.
kids, we raise our we're in the society where, like, and we say it on social media, like, it doesn't matter what other people think. And I was talking to my mother a little while ago about that. I'm like, I'm trying to raise my kids and let them know that it doesn't matter what other people think. And she's like, people that walk around and genuinely don't care what anyone else thinks that's a disorder. That's not
100%.
okay.
Yeah. No, and absolutely. It's not about not caring what people think. It's about taking
That's sociopathy.
100% and absolute narcissism.
Yeah.
It's about taking what people think and say about you with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
One of the things that I talk a lot about with people, I've lived in 3 northern communities, and so no matter what, working in health and social, you deal with a lot of mental health stuff, and you deal with a lot of relationship stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and it's you cannot create expectations for another person. And I think that's what happens so often in addiction, and that goes both ways.
Mm-hmm.
People who are watching you engage in active addiction behaviors, they want a specific thing for you. They want you to be healthy. They want you to be sober. They want you to be not in danger. They
Mm-hmm.
want you to be not risking yourself. And I didn't have a particular breaking point necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
I'd started a relationship with a married man, and I saw him in public with his wife at one point. And I think that
That made it real.
it did.
Yeah.
It did. I didn't have to think about her.
Yeah.
I didn't have to acknowledge her. It was, he was making a decision, and I didn't know he was married when we first met. And so, but there's only so long that you can make excuses for yourself.
Yeah.
And there's only so long that you can deny the impact that behavior is having on your life and the life of others.
So giving that desire or that archetype in your mind or whatever, calling it the pig and saying don't feed the pig, that was a big step forward for you?
It was, and it kind of goes both ways for me. So it's about not giving into whatever that impulse is in that moment, positive or negative. And that's one of the things too is, you often exchange one compulsive behavior for another. And so I'm not going to give into whatever the other behavior. So it's not just that, tier 1 behavior. I'm not going to give into the tier 2
or the eating or the shopping or the whatever.
Yeah.
So, but what did you replace it with then?
At first, exercise.
Okay.
Which wasn't a bad compromise.
Yeah.
But it did become, just like anything, it became a bit obsessive.
Yeah.
It was, like biking 20 or 30 kilometers a day and taking my dog out for like 6 or 7 walks. And I definitely was in the best shape of my life, which was fantastic. I stopped sleeping for a long time. And I would go through these cycles where I would be up for a couple of days and then I would crash for like 17, 18 hours. And just, what else did I replace it with?
Well, why don't you think about that for a minute? Let's talk to Patrick here. Patrick, what's coming to mind when you're thinking about this and when we're talking about like tools and tips and ways of thinking that can bring someone out of these behaviors? If you are a professional and wish to deepen your understanding of substance use disorder, check out the AIMS SK program through the College of Medicine at the University of Saskatchewan, designed to help you improve health outcomes for individuals with substance use disorder. To make contact or learn more about our sponsors, check out our new merch, or if you want to show us some love and buy us a coffee, all of those links are in the show notes below.
Yeah, earlier we talked about the thought life. And so one of the things we talk a lot about helping people identify is like, kind of some of what Caitlin said, understanding your immediate gratification, understanding what you're sort of, again, this is an overused word, but what are your triggers? And so being aware of that environment. You typically, one of the things people commonly report is they don't want to sexualize people that they run into in public, and because that becomes part of what their thought life cycle, so to speak, as they tend to sexualize almost everybody that they're attracted to. Mm-hmm. And so we try to work on acknowledging and slowing that thought process down so that you don't go down that path, being aware of your preoccupation, being aware of what your thought life is. If you're obsessing, if you're going into fantasy, the one thing we talk about is this idea of 1, 2, 3 or ABC, awareness, breaking, and then having compassion for yourself, breaking from that thought. Mm-hmm. I personally have found that people like lists, and because a lot of the people I work with typically are men, I usually have like use sports as a list, like create a list of your top. So in America, we have the NFL. The NFL, we just talk about like the divisions in football. So I always like use there's 4 divisions. There's 4 teams in every division. So it's like NFC North is Detroit, Chicago, Green Bay, and Minnesota. So we use like something like that. Use repetitive lists to try to kind of redirect your thoughts. So those are a big part of that, kind of helping people redirect their thoughts, acknowledging their thoughts. Also, there's also times that things in the past can come up. So they call those euphoric recalls. Being aware of the same type of tools they use there, so don't think about, not just not thinking about it, but breaking from it and redirecting your thought to who you want to be, and kind of getting your mind recentered. The other thing we talk a lot about is, again, environment. And, Caitlin talked a little about it too earlier. She didn't use the term, but the term we use is arousal template. And everybody sort of has an arousal template in their experience. Everybody has a sort of a sheet of paper, so to speak, that's blank. And I think about, you take your thumb, you put your thumb on ink, and you put your ink on your thumb. Take the ink that's on your thumb, put it on the paper,
on the ink in the paper,
and go down the list of the exactly. So as you're going down the list, that first impact that you make is going to be your strongest impact, whatever that is. If it's healthy, if it's unhealthy. Caitlin kind of touched on that earlier. That's part of people's development of what they understand sexually, what they're attracted to, those kind of things. So that first interaction is going to be pretty powerful for folks. So identifying that in their life, why has that been significant? Other practical tools I can think of is just, and Caitlin talked a little bit about, replacing the behavior, acknowledging what that behavior is, acknowledging how you're going to find that balance. I think that's a big part of it. Again, a lot of addiction is about the lack of boundaries. So again, kind of putting boundaries in place of things that you need to, so you can find more balance. The 2 places I think about, like with a lot of people act out with their phone. So the 2 places the phone typically goes is the bedroom and the bathroom. Those are 2 places the phone should never, ever be ever for any reason whatsoever. So you just keep your phone out of the bathroom and out of the bedroom. Those are 2 really good. One for sleep for the bedroom, and the bathroom. You think about those old cord phones from back in the day. Nobody be taking that in the bathroom. So it's why is the cell phone going there? So same kind of thing. Just kind of keep those boundaries and acknowledging those boundaries. And then I think just again being consistent with that is a big part of it. So once you start to become more consistent, you'll find those that it becomes a little bit easier as you start to do them more. So part of that is repurposing that behavior, changing that behavior in that way. Those are small things you can start to do. I think the other thing to really be aware of is, are you isolating or are you being in solitude? So one of the things comes up a lot of times for people is they tend to isolate. When they're isolated, they're away from people, they're away from supports, they're away from other ways that they can avoid the behavior.
And I can understand that too. Like if you're going out, if you're new to this, if you're trying to break that behavior, and the desire to engage in that behavior increases because you're abstaining from it, right? You go out into public and you're sexualizing everyone. I can understand that. And is that a common thread that you hear?
Well, typically isolation starts before that would happen. So isolation just means that they tend to sort of get away. Like people will, somebody goes to work and they have a stressful day, rather than, hey, talking about it to their partner or whatever. They want to go and let's look up something online, let's be online, whatever. And then that kind of leads into the acting out behavior. So isolation is different than solitude. Solitude has a goal. Solitude has a purpose. So if it's to meditate, if it's to refocus, if it's to relax, whatever that solitude is, you're having that goal. Isolation is just to escape. So it's very similar in the same way as it would be like if you're, in fantasy, you want to try to escape from what's going on in reality. So isolation is common. So just being aware of that. Yeah, I think, like you said, Daniel, the fact that going out in public, you're going to be potentially triggered more. And one of the things I feel like with people, and this is just my experience, is that, like you're not going to be able to avoid everything with this behavior because it's everywhere. And so you have to learn how to be able to accept and cope with what's around. Mm-hmm. And so there might be certain circumstances that, yes, you absolutely cannot go to that particular beach. You cannot go to that particular sporting event. You cannot go to that particular concert. Those are very common. Sure. Caitlin. If the dungeon's part of it, yeah, can't go there either. Not sure you want to, but can't go there. So it's a matter of finding those places that are sort of safe, and then again acknowledging what those are. I think that once you find those, then can you continue to again be aware of the ones that you're staying away from, and not allowing, going back to what Caitlin said, allowing the pig to kind of draw you back into it, because that's going to happen. I mean, there's going to be that push for a while. And then the longer you do certain behaviors, the more lifestyle changes you make, that tends to take away some of that power. So it doesn't mean that it's not going to be there. It just means that you have better awareness of it. And how do you address those things with more awareness? Can you combat those in a healthier way?
That reminds me, and we'll get, you got some stuff you've been writing down there, and Caitlin's got some things, but we'll get there in just a minute. That reminds me of one of my own stories. A couple of years ago, I went and took a motorcycle class, one of my bucket list things. I was going to get my motorcycle license, and so I did. I went to this all weekend course, and I learned some things. I learned about my own limitations, and with my strengths, and the instructor at the very end said, "We have now given you these skills. Now it is time for you to face your fears. All of these skills are useless to you if you stay in your driveway. So
I love that.
Put your head up, look out, look around, and go out in traffic.
Yeah.
And go where and face that fear." So that really resonated with me, and it was like, when you hear something and it changes who you are, it changes how you see the world. That was like one of those moments that was completely like out of left field. I was not there for a therapy session. I was there to learn how to ride a motorcycle, and here I am walking out there with a new look on all facets of my life. So anyways, Caitlin, what would you like to add?
I just wanted to echo some of what you said. There's a big difference between being alone and being lonely, being alone in a moment and being lonely. Mm-hmm. And I mean, one of the biggest things that we know in public health and harm reduction is that the opposite of addiction is connection. Mm-hmm. And I would say any addictive behavior is about a lack of connection, but sex addiction, I think you're looking at a very significant and very deep-rooted lack of connection. And
connection with what?
With other people.
Yeah, other people.
Yeah, and I think a lack of connection to sort of like a deep intimacy with someone.
Yes.
And that was a big part of 100%. It for me.
My personal experience can confirm that 100%.
And
intimacy is fearful. So how do you have that? It's like having a giant fence up in, between your yard and your neighbor's yard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. I will say, so I met my current partner in 2017, or we started seeing each other in 2017. I did know them before that. And one of the biggest, I guess, supports in my recovery was having a partner who did not shame me, who did not judge me, who was incredibly understanding of sort of what I'd gone through. We have we're very sexually connected. We have very similar sexual desires and libidos. So that has really, really helped. I'm actively polyamorous, although I don't have another romantic partner or sexual partner at the moment. And for me, again, and I know, like when I was seeing the sex addiction counselor, that was something that he did. He was wary about is polyamory just another excuse to have sex with more people? And no, it wasn't for me. I
Did you
actually
have to sit down and think about that?
not at that point, because I had already sort of done that internal work. But what I do see, and especially in some of the younger folks in the polyamory circles that exist here, is it it is that validation seeking. They are seeking fulfillment in another person, and in multiple people, and that's not healthy. That's not going to be a productive relationship paradigm. That's not going to be, and not for anybody. Not for anybody. Um,
It's not relationship enhancing. Yeah, it's just yeah.
no, exactly. And like polyamory can be phenomenal and amazing. I live in what's called a V. So, my partner and I and their other partner all live together. Um, my metamour. So the term for your partner's partner in polyamory is metamour, the love of my love. Um, we don't have a sexual relationship, so we are roommates basically. Um, but it especially when you go to that level, like when you're integrating multiple relationships into one unit,
One household,
one
yeah.
household, the communication has to be on point.
Yeah.
And certainly we have not been without our conflict. You know, it's three personalities in a household trying to function. Um, but it's been an incredibly open, incredibly understanding space. I read an article, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and it talked about how you love. And I love intensely. I feel all feelings pretty extremely. And that goes part and parcel with my mental illness, like BPD. You do feel those extremes pretty deeply. But the article talked about how you approach all of your love relationships and approaching them as if everyone was a lover. And it took me a little while to sort of unpack that, but it talked about the intensity and the depth of relationships. And I mean, like, I have had one of my oldest friends, we've known each other since we were 5, and I'm 38. So we've been in each other's lives for 33 years. And so that's the type of relationships that I like to build, incredibly deep, where sort of nothing is taboo to talk about, where there's no fear of judgment. And
that's what you need to be healthy.
That's
to
what
be
I
well.
need. And what I realized was that I was seeking that depth in quantity, not quality.
Ah, there it is.
And
the same thing from it. It sounds to me like you're looking for a specific thing in anyone that was around.
100%.
Right.
100%. And then I'm placing my desires and my expectations onto other people without communicating them, without having those conversations from the beginning, without, really knowing if the compatibility existed on the multiple levels. It was, I really like having sex with this person. Okay, let's see if I can tick all of these other boxes that I really want in a partner.
Yeah. And certainly that led to heartache.
It did, and it led to infidelity.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was, again, in that cycle of hurt. Yeah. And I didn't want to cause that anymore. I didn't want to be a part of that anymore.
Yeah. Patrick, do you have anything to add?
I like that you talked about, Caitlin, the quality versus quantity. I think there's a lot of people who feel like that's, they have a lot of relationships, but they don't necessarily have a lot of quality relationships. And it feels like there's a lot of, at least in my experience, there's a lot of people who, going back to the intimacy piece, that that's their, they feel like there's nobody's going to love them because their belief system is that they're unlovable.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that was part of Caitlin's experience, but I know there's a lot of people who feel that way. And does that mean that you're going to have a sex addiction because you feel that way? That's your belief? Not necessarily, but I think it certainly does make the ground fertile for possibility of that happening, of some kind of addiction, right? You're trying to fill that wound. And belief system's huge from the perspective of, what do we really believe about ourselves or about the world, about other relationships. I know yesterday I was in one of our support groups that we have, and the 4 questions they ask in the beginning part of the program, or part of our slides anyways, that, what's your belief system about your self-image, about relationships, about your needs, and about sexuality. And those are all kind of foundational to what we've been talking about.
Is there a common thread when it comes to belief systems around sexuality that you're seeing in people that are coming to you for help?
Usually the biggest one is just that they're unlovable, or that there's something wrong with them. They're somehow broken. The shame piece, we talked about that, quite a bit earlier, but there's the shame piece around, there's something inherently wrong with me alone, individually. And so because of that, it changes the way they think about the world, changes the way that they see other people, changes the way they see relationships. And so a lot of times that belief system going into, sort of kicks off the addictive cycle, which is sort of the bottom part. If you imagine a figure 8, there's the bottom of the figure 8's more of the physical shows up, right? The thought life, the acting out, the despair of that over and over and over again, but it feeds into the addictive system, which is the top of the figure 8. Top of the figure 8's your belief system, what you think, and then unmanageability, which we talked about way at the beginning of our conversation. But that cycle, or that system together, that seems to just perpetuate itself. And so, Caitlin talked a little about that in her experience. It just elevates, and people are unable to get off of that sort of track. And so because of that, it just sort of, it elevates until you're able to identify what the system is and work on stopping that. And that is a lifelong process for some folks, just to understanding what is their belief system, what do they really believe, and challenging that every day. If you're going to go back to a cognitive behavioral type perspective, what we think is what we're going to do. I said that kind of earlier. What we think about ourselves is how we're going to see the world. And so there's a lot of that cognitive piece that, those negative self-talks are really damaging. And those come from wounds. Those come from other people. Those can come from our peers, from our family of origin.
Self-inflicted.
Absolutely.
Self-inflicted. Absolutely.
100%.
Yeah. And so
most of my wounds are self-inflicted.
Oh God.
Yeah. So I think we're rounding the bend here. But I don't think we're quite done yet. Patrick, I'm interested to talk about rebuilding relationships after these behaviors have begun to be corrected now. And that goes, like Caitlin was mentioning, her family discovered, like her family found out about this and they were concerned and they were worried. And I'm sure that thanks to a lot of stigma in our society that there could be some rejection from family, that there could be some rejection from loved ones. What have you done to work with people towards rebuilding relationship after some of these behaviors have been integrated into their life for so long?
So to better answer your question, are you talking about family relationships specifically, or are you talking about partner relationships? Because there's really kind of two different things there.
Let's talk about partner relationships in this context.
Okay. So, and I don't know how much of experience Caitlin has in her experience with this, but I know for us, particularly our practice, we have and everybody who's a CSAT sort of does this in different ways. And again, we talked about earlier the partner betrayal piece, and that there are therapists specifically that work with what they call partner trauma specialists that work specifically with that. And that's that you want to find if you're in a relationship who's been betrayed of any kind, you want to work with a partner specialist because they will help you with that aspect. CSAT can't do that. And a lot of people feel like we can, but we're not specialized in that. We have a process called the disclosure process. And that process is really about getting to what is reality for a partner. And so our way of doing it's a little bit different than other people's, but basically it ends up coming down to having a disclosure, which means that they come out with everything that they've been asked by their partner. So if their partner says, "Hey, I'd like to know your entire sexual history," they have a document that they work out and put all of the information out there, and they have a session that's therapist led to get that out of, so that's not kept in secret anymore.
That gives me anxiety
typically,
thinking about that. That
yeah,
could be really freaking hard, man.
It's a very difficult difficult process to go through. And our like I said, our way is a little bit different than what some of the Arab people do, but that's
yeah.
It's super hard to talk about sex with your family.
Yeah.
And yeah, so when
it'd probably be a little bit different. It would be more of like you'd probably write a letter. This is kind of what it is, more of like a type, and there is a part of the disclosure process that we do with partners that's like that too. But ultimately ends up getting backed up by a non-criminal polygraph, which again, I'm not a polygraph expert, but basically it's to verify the truth that they have just disclosed about on their disclosure document. So there's about a 5-step process to it. So it's yeah. And again, some of that is because, and again, it's not everybody's going to do that. Everybody has to, I mean, it's, if they're in the process, they do, but if, it's one of those things that's designed to try to help people establish truth. And because there's been so much lying going on, that's typically why they do that. Now, again, is everybody gonna feel that they need to do that? I've worked with couples who've said absolutely no way. I don't work with couples now, but I've had couples who report, look, we just don't want to do the polygraph. It's just too difficult for us to do. So, we're in a better spot than we were coming in, so we're gonna stick it out the way it is. So, again, some partners do, some partners don't. It just depends on the couple.
Yeah, Caitlin,
I came to some awareness within this process, and then since. That I called the common denominator, and the common denominator in sort of the chaos was me. And so, a couple of relationships ended, mostly due to infidelity. And then another relationship ended not due to infidelity, but because of my behavior. And I was like, okay, so it looks like it's me. And why is it me? And what is it about my interactions and my behavior that are creating this stress for people? I think it can be my ex-husband. So I was unfaithful in my marriage, and that was definitely one of the reasons behind the marriage breakdown. And we couldn't fix it. And there were many reasons why, but we didn't look at each other the same way anymore. And I think that those breaks are very, very hard to patch. And there's an inherent lack of trust. And unfortunately, I think that will always exist. You can fight it. You can tamp it down. You can work through it and work around it. But, it's that whenever they're on their phone extra, are they talking to someone? If they're 20 minutes late, did they stop for a blowjob on the way home? She hasn't answered her phone in 2 hours. Yeah, she hasn't answered her phone in 2 hours. Where is she? What's she doing? And I think over time, those suspicions can decrease. The more positive interactions that a couple has, the better that trust will be.
Yeah.
But it's always going to be there just a little bit. And that is pretty emotionally exhausting.
Yeah. And additional to that too, this is it's an absolute consequence of the breaking of the trust. But then on the other side of it, the person that's trying to prove themselves, I mean, the amount of things that they have to go through sometimes to try to earn that trust back is, I've never been through it, but I tell you, it's exhausting sitting in that experience of people, because it's just, they can do everything that they think that they can do, think about it ahead of time. They almost obsess over just being able to prove it. And sometimes it doesn't, there's just one thing they miss, or there's one thing that they couldn't control, or there's one, and I feel like that's just the devastation of the partner trauma piece that, again, people don't really understand that, especially because usually a lot of people will tell whoever it is that's acting out, or who's struggling with the addiction, hey, go work on you, and I'm going to stay over here and wait for you to heal. And I tell people all the time, a relationship is a living organism, and if you introduce a betrayal to that, it's like putting two or three drops of red food coloring in the fish tank. You can't take the water out of the fish tank. That fish tank now has red water. You have to deal with whatever that is. If you want this relationship to continue, you got to
That's
navigate that together.
that's a
Yeah.
powerful
It's not,
metaphor, and incredibly accurate with, it's, again, without going into too much detail. I mean, Donna and I lived together in addiction for 8 years, and it got real dark at the end, and we ended up, our relationship didn't survive at the end, and some really horrific things happened, so, there is my healing, there is Donna's healing, and then there is our healing.
You're together healing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that together
100%.
thing, and if you want to go back to the program, and you have this big hate on for it, and I get it, I get it, it's not perfect. So I'm not going to sit here and try and like, you shouldn't hate it, but it's one of those things where it's like, this is your responsibility to heal, and there's not a whole lot of open talk about healing the relationship. So, and that was something that I had to learn sort of on my own, and with Donna, and through some hardships, and through some mistakes, and through some pain, lots of pain. Oh my God. But we're coming to a place now where we're starting to realize that, okay, there is this organism, like you mentioned, Patrick, that needs to heal, and we can't do it separately. It has to come together. We have to have conversations. Some of the things that are going on, like I've said, I even wrote a song about it, as my demons wear your face. Right? Like, the things that are bothering me, they like to put on different masks that look like Donna, or that look like this person, or that look like that, and then I'm mad at them. And then, like, that's just something that I have to learn to communicate, not only with within myself, between the experiencer and the observer, but also with my partner.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
So that's what your comment triggered in me. But I think we're coming to the end. Is there any sort of, Patrick, you look like you had something to say. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add to something we were talked about earlier. What are some other tools and things you can use? And I really like this one that we could utilize at the beginning of the recovery program that we are part of. We use Dr. Patrick Carnes. He's kind of the original researcher on a lot of the sex addiction stuff. So we use his program. But he talks of this idea, and he uses the empty chair exercise. And I don't know, for any of those who don't know what that is, it's basically if you were to put an empty chair across from you, imagine who the person is sitting across from you that you want to say. Usually it's a grief exercise, so if you lost someone, what would you want to say to them? If you think about your addict or your addiction, I always challenge people, how would you visualize that? What would it look like in your life? What does it look like? It could be anything. It could be a caricature. It could be, whatever it is it could be you. A lot of people choose themselves. And if it was sitting across from you, what would you want to say to it? What would it ask you? What questions would you want it to have that dialogue with? And that's a dialogue that's a lot of journaling, but it can really help people to, you said, Daniel, earlier, put a face to it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a tool that people can use.
Can I jump in and just say, if I was sitting across the room from my addiction and looking at it, I would say, thanks for trying to help, is what I would say.
That is beautiful. That is beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Caitlin, send us home.
Okay. So I think one of the biggest things that I realized through this journey for me was that most of this was about my unmet expectations for myself. And I recognize that not all substance abuse or addictions behaviors are about that. For me, I was chasing a relationship structure that I'd never had. I was chasing a connection that I'd never felt. And one of the things that I think really feeds that cycle, and I don't know if anyone knows the term NRE, or new relationship energy, is that high that comes with that first bit of connection to a new person, and especially if that connection is really, really strong. And one of the things is one of the things that can really drive sexual addiction is
Absolutely.
chasing.
Yep.
Well, and it's like chasing that first high. It's like chasing the first time you did heroin. It's like you are constantly trying to find that feeling again. And then dealing with the grief that comes with not finding that feeling. I had to mourn the loss of the person I thought I would be. And And I had to adjust those expectations that I had created for myself in my very early life about what my adulthood would look like. Because I certainly never expected at 8 to be in a polyamorous relationship with a non-binary human. I never expected to be where I am today. I love it. I love my life. I consider myself to be enormously privileged to do what I do, and to be able to help people in need in various different ways. But it definitely, it comes with a mourning process.
Yeah.
It really does. And Daniel, I'm sure that you experience this, and it's not just the mourning of the person that you thought you would be. It's the mourning of the good experiences that you had while you were in active addiction, because not everything's terrible.
No.
Not everything is awful.
I had some great times.
Not everything is ugly.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have just the best time of your life.
Yeah.
You really do. And because you're interacting with people who are experiencing the same things as you, they're going through the same things as you, you're with your peers. There is nothing that beats that. And I think that's why sort of peer mentorship in recovery is so incredibly important, is to be able to talk to someone who is having those same experiences, who sort of can at least relate on a personal level to what you're going through, is unbeatable.
Patrick, final thoughts, and after final thoughts, where can people find you?
Okay, so one thing I'd say, just to touch on what Caitlin was saying about mourning, you need to mourn kind of who you feel like you were supposed to be. I think consequently also there's parts of it where you have to mourn who you thought you were going to end up with. And so they talk about the cosmic lover. That's one we talk quite a bit about. And it's this idea that you're going to find this perfect person. You're chasing that relationship, that person's going to give you the affirmation or the, belief of worthiness or whatever, however you want to word that, that relationship, you're going to find that person's going to give you those things. And I know in my experience dating, that was part of one of the things that I failed is to recognize that the person was going to be human, not looking for the person who was going to make me feel better about me. And back to kind of what Caitlin said, we're always working on ourselves to find that belief in ourselves of who we really are, and to understand that other people in our situations, our circumstances don't give us our validation. We got to find it from who we are, and see the special people that we are as individuals. So with that, I think I'll give you kind of where can you find me? So a couple of resources. So our practice is called North Point Professional Counseling. We're one of Michigan's largest sex addiction resources. So it's northpoint-counseling.com. You can find us there. We have multiple therapists. My boss wrote a book on partner trauma, on how we do disclosure processes. I would definitely encourage people to check that out. It's called The Partner's Guide to Truth and Healing. It's by John Sternfeld. So check that
Caitlin's
out.
writing stuff down.
Yeah. My personal Instagram and Threads account is rated_PGE, and that's all lowercase. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Those are probably my two best social media platforms to find me on. We also have an in-house podcast that we started, North Point Perspective, or North Point Counseling Perspective is the name of it. And so again, we just talked about earlier, talked about polygraphs, talked about partner trauma, all that stuff's on there. We got several episodes. I got an episode coming up that I did on the 12 dimensions or 12 characteristics of healthy sexuality. So some things like that. So definitely check that out. Those are some things that we have as resources from just some of the stuff we've done.
Caitlin, where can people find you?
At Saskatoon Sexual Health, so downtown on Avenue C South.
In Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada.
Saskatchewan, Canada. You can also find me on social media, on Instagram and Facebook, and LinkedIn. Yeah, I have LinkedIn as well.
Sexual Health, or Saskatoon Sexual Health?
Yeah, and then my own as well.
Okay.
And I think just a last thought. My journey brought a lot of self-awareness, and sometimes self-awareness is incredibly painful, because when you are working towards gaining self-awareness, you have to look at all parts of yourself.
Yeah.
And some parts of us are really ugly, really, really ugly. And I think that's a universal reality for every human being. There are dark parts of us that we don't want to talk about, that we don't want to acknowledge. But it's usually those dark parts that drive these issues.
Yeah.
And Patrick just said it, like, we cannot look for validation in other people, or we cannot rely on other people for our only validation. I think that, you know, we all want to be told we're doing a good job. We all want to be affirmed in various ways, but that can't be the only, like, external validation and external affirmation cannot be the only thing keeping you going, because you're not always going to have someone readily available to tell you that you're a good girl.
Okay. Thank you both so much for joining me today for this conversation. And that's it for now. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dana.
Okay, if you got something out of today's episode, please hit that subscribe button at the bottom of the screen. Give us a like, drop us a comment, let us know your thoughts on this topic. If you want to support the channel, there's always a super chat. You can buy us a coffee, you can do all the things. That's all I got for you this week. Thanks so much. Take care, everyone.
Say, this is Hard Knocks Talks.